guys like writing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Kind
No? Yes. Okay, well, writing is one of the most important skills you can gain. You use it everywhere in life, from, I don't know, being a cop, you need writing, being a journalist. And in this class, you've seen you definitely need writing. And so right now, can you just take a second and on a scale of 1 to 10, rate yourself on how you feel in the general scale of writing, being able to quickly compose an essay or write whatever. Just rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 on how you feel right now of how you could write. So just write it down real quick. On a scale of 1 to 10, how good of a writer do you think you are? 10 being like Mrs. English.
Yes.
So like, I'm like a 6 or 7. Caitlin's like a 9. Do we have the little...
Where is the presentation?
Oh, there it is. Just kidding. Okay, so let me give you a little bit of background about classes I've had in writing. So I've taken 5 Mrs. English classes. This is my 2nd year of American Lit, so I've written a lot of papers for Mrs. E. Outside of Mrs. E's class, I've had 2 paragraph writing classes as well as 3 essay writing classes. So in the perfect world, I should be a ridiculously good writer. But until this year, I was terrible because I made a lot of mistakes. And so for the first 3 years of high school, you know, I made a ton of mistakes. I didn't write good papers. I would cram, I'd procrastinate, and you know, I could get the papers done and I could get a passing grade, but you know, they weren't that great of papers. And so through this presentation, I'm gonna walk you through this year how I would have attacked and approached a paper, and kind of while I walk you through it, I'm going to explain to you some of the mistakes that I made in the past and how I fixed them. And so really kind of take those to heart, learn from my mistakes, because the earlier you can learn from the things that I messed up on, the less you'll make those mistakes and the better you'll be in the long run. So step number 1, select a topic. And in Mrs. E's class, the topic is often selected for you. If you don't have it, like if you don't have a topic, it's pretty easy to pick. But the topic she typically gives you. The next step after you have your base topic is to divide it up into 2 to 3 subcategories, which are normally, you know, your bigger, broader paragraphs in a 5-paragraph essay. The way that you do this is you're going to brainstorm. So you have your topic, so say Uncle Tom's Cabin. You just take a sheet of paper, you do a brain dump. You write down every single thing or big keyword that you know about this topic, and then you go back after, and then you select topics that you think could work. Now, underclassmen, this is where you want to be getting the majority of your help. If you're an 8th grader, freshman, or sophomore, Mrs. E is more than willing to take the time. If you call her up, if you show up at her house, she'll take the time to help you work through this paper. The advantage of getting help on topics here is that you have your main topic. If you pick, say, like a bad subtopic, so say Uncle Tom's Cabin, if I wanted to write an entire subcategory in that paper about some little character because I think I like the way they dress or something, or the way it was described in the book, like that's not going to work. That's not going to support your thesis or anything throughout the paper. So Mrs. E will be able to kind of help you determine what subcategories will have enough information for you to write and back up and support your thesis. So definitely get help there. With practice, you'll be able to determine what sort of subcategories will have enough information to fill a body paragraph in a paper. So step 2 is the outline. And this was my biggest mistake all my high school career. So how many of you, freshman, sophomore year in writing, your teachers would always say, before you write the paragraph, make an outline? And how many of you wrote the paragraph and then made the outline? Yeah? Anybody? Really? Okay, well, I thought the outline was useless. I was like, oh no, I can do it. So I would write the paragraph, and then I'd craft an outline, and I'd turn it in and be like, yeah, so here's my outline. And they're like, oh, that's so great, good job. But then essays came, and I started trying to just write these papers without the outline, and you start getting lost. You get like, it's like a maze that you gotta be organized and know where you are. And I would repeat myself. My arguments would be terrible. And so the advantage of doing an outline is that you can have everything laid out in front of you, and it's detailed yet simple enough that you can still rework it and reorganize it. And so with the outline, you're gonna have your thesis, and then you have your 3 main body paragraphs. And then next you're going to start developing the 3 points in the body paragraphs. Yeah, so the outline gives you the framework, and it allows you to just continue to flesh out and develop your paper. So you develop this outline, and then as you do your research, as you read, then you find quotes, find supporting details, and you just fill them in that outline. And it's right there for you, so you can always go back, double check, make sure you're not double crossing yourself or whatever. So at this point, you do want to ignore the intro and conclusion. You do those at the end. That's another mistake I made. I would always, right at the beginning of the paper, I'd want to write this good intro, and then I'd just go through the paper. But you want to start by developing the outline for the body, and then you worry about the intro and conclusion later. Another thing that I made a mistake was when I would do an outline, it would just be like one word. So like Uncle Tom at this point, or another thing. So treat the outline as a rough draft. This is where you want to get the hard work done. And so my outlines now, today, they basically look like the paper themselves. And when I go to do a draft of the body paragraphs, it takes me 10-15 minutes because I'm just adding in some extra wording. So you want to do as much work as you can here. So yeah, when you come to draft the body paragraphs, most of the hard work is done. So it takes very little time. You want to focus on the flow and wording of the paper. Wording is tough. You want to use the vocabulary in a way that you use it in your everyday life. So you don't want to be looking up all these synonyms that like all these fancy words, because then you sound cocky almost. Like you want it to be worded well and concisely so that the reader can understand really well what you're saying. Now the introduction. To grasp the attention of the reader. If you look at a paper, a 5-paragraph essay, it's kind of like a building, which, it's a stereotypical analogy, but it really is true. The base, hold on. I forgot the analogy. The base of the paragraph is your thesis, and then you build on it. The structure of it would be all your supporting points and details. But the outside of the building, which is the really pretty part, that's the introduction, and that grasps the attention of the reader. It's like a person seeing a building, being like, oh, I want to go into that building and go see what's inside it, right? So the introduction plays a really big part in getting your reader into the body of your paragraph, which contains all of the content. I guess a pretty standard way to have an introduction is through a hook, grasp the attention of the reader, then you kind of narrow it down, so you reel them in, and then you present your thesis, which is your concise statement of what the paper is about and your opinion on the paper. And in the thesis, your paper will always reflect back upon the thesis. One type of introduction is the general to specific introduction. In this, almost every paper I write, it's always the general to specific introduction. You start with a broad topic, and then you narrow it down. So here's an example. So everyone faces difficulties. That's your general topic. And then you would narrow it down into handling difficulties. And then you would narrow it down even more to some people give up when they handle difficulties, or some people overcome them. And then in this case, Thomas Edison overcame a difficult childhood and became successful. And that would be your thesis. So do you see how it starts really general there, where you can fill it in with anything, and people can relate to the difficulties, and then you just narrow it down more and more to where Thomas Edison, which is what the paper was about, was able to overcome difficulties as a child. Does that make sense? Yeah. The conclusion, this is my favorite part of the essay just because it's the simplest. You restate the thesis, and then you do a summary sentence for each of your body paragraphs. So sometimes it feels like you're kind of cheating off your own paper, but you're really just, you're going off the work that you've already done. And then to end the paper, 90% of the times I do what's called a rhetorical question. So you ask a question to the reader, kind of getting them to think and leave them with a thought-provoking question in their minds. The final step, actually the second to last step, is editing. You edit as hard as you can, and edit it yourself, have your mom edit, have your friends edit. The more sets of eyes that you can have looking at it, the more opportunity that you'll have to catch your mistakes. And you know, even if you feel like your paper is great, just reading through it, you'll find places that you can reword it or make it stronger. And the more times you go through it, it really does help quite a bit. Final step, you print the cover page for Mrs. English, make sure grade, word count's all set, make sure your pages are in order when you print them off, cover page on the top, staple it together, hole punch it, turn it in. And that's your paper. So can you all turn to page 373 in your syllabus? We're going to quickly review Mrs. E's sheet on writing papers for you. Just a couple of points I want to hit. Some of the big things in the sheet that she gave to us at the beginning of the year, no contractions. It's very unprofessional, so no contractions, that's 1 or 2% for each. That's huge. Formal grammar, which is basically contractions. You need to meet the required word count, and you also need to make sure that you're writing about what she assigned. Don't just go off on some completely different tangent if she asks you to write about a very specific topic. Double spacing, and be sure to cite your sources, which leads right into plagiarism. Now, I never really struggled with plagiarism until about junior year, and I know most of you probably don't, but in public schools and in college, it does happen quite a bit, and so it's very easy to avoid, but it's also very easy to slip into. So the best way that I avoid plagiarism is, so say I'm reading a passage online, or maybe a summary of a book, and there's something that they say in it that I like. So what I'll do is I'll read the passage, and then I wait a few minutes, and then I turn that off, and then I write it down in my own words without looking at it. And that is not plagiarism, okay? Because you read it, and then you write it in your own words, and then I'll go back and I'll make sure that I'm not copying them. Okay? So you get it in your own understanding, and then you do it in your own words. So I hope this has helped you understand how to write a little bit. So take a second, re-rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10 on how good of a writer you would feel knowing this information. So I hope this helped, and best of luck next year.
Okay, questions? Start with this.